Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to today's webinar, How Network Compliance Accelerates Automation. My name is Glenn Gray. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Itential, and I am joined by our resident network guru, Rich Martin. Say hi, Rich.
Hello, Glenn. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
Outstanding. All right, so I'm excited to jump into today's topic, examining network compliance as a necessary building block for automating across all your networks. But before we get started, let's just cover a few housekeeping points here. Everyone on the call is going to be muted. And if you have any questions along the way, please drop them into the question panel, which you can find under the webinar. We'll do our best to answer questions along the way and cover any remaining ones we have at the end during our Q&A session. If we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we'll answer them via email shortly after the webinar has ended. All right. So the agenda for today. First thing we're going to talk about is the set of automation myths and why they're myths. And we're going to demystify some of these for you. We're going to talk about why compliance and automation should be part of the same solution. We're going to talk about the foundational components of a network automation solution that covers both compliance and automation. We're going to talk about how Itential's approach to both compliance and automation is different. And then we're going to jump into a demo where Rich is going to demonstrate in the product how to build some compliance building blocks to enable really high-level orchestration and automation like self-service networking, closed loop, event-driven automations, and things like that. And then we'll finish up with a Q&A session. All right, Rich, let's talk about some myths here. So I'll play the part of, let's call him Gary.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why I am unable to or afraid of automating right now. So let's start with this. I can't automate because I don't know what my devices look like. There is no standard for them. What do you say to that?
Well, I would say that this is a very common thing that we hear. And, the myth isn't the statement. The statement is probably more likely true, unfortunately, that the network, that the networking team has today is spread out pretty wide. I mean, if we just consider the on-prem network, the amount of devices, the amount of changes that are going on, and it's very likely that they don't have a good idea of what all of their devices look like. And when we say look like, what we're really talking about is how are they configured. And when we're talking about standards, we're really talking about compliance, meaning are these things configured in a way they ought to be configured for the best security, performance, reliability. And so while the statement itself isn't the myth is actually what kind of undergirds it. It's the idea that I can't automate until everything is pristine and perfect. And in fact, we'll talk a little bit more about why that is.
All right. Well, to that I say to you, I can't automate because I need to have a single source of truth, and I don't have time to put all of that together. What do you say to that?
Well, again, this is almost a kind of the next step from the first one, because this seems like, and we hear this from potential customers and even customers that have adopted our platform, that we're looking at ways to, get into automating their network, but at the same time dealing with the compliance that really ought to be done, as part of that. And so what this is saying is, in order to get to a point where I know what my devices look like, i.e. they're compliant to a standard that I've defined, I really need to create a single source of truth. That seems to be like the idea that these people are leading to is, and in order to have a single source of truth, what does that entail? That entails potentially taking every single device on your network, consuming its configuration into this application or this database or whatever it is that you're using as your single source of truth, building CLI models or other kinds of templates around that, and then getting that to a point to where now you feel like, okay, we've got everything under control in a single source of truth. Now we can start automating. And the myth here is you don't have to do that, but the thing that really needs to be considered is how long is that going to take? And that's where I think a lot of enterprises and network teams run into is, while that seems like a great idea, if the need for automation and compliance is immediate, this takes you down a path that doesn't deliver immediate results.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I am, in fact, a fairly lazy person, and so I don't want to go down this path. So you have successfully debunked that myth for Gary. I can't automate because I don't know how to code. What should I do?
Well, this again, the underlying myth here is that in order to do any kind of network automation, I must know how to write code. And while that may have been true in the past, that was kind of like the only way to do automation, there are a lot of modern platforms and solutions that don't require you to write code. In fact, that's a good thing, because if you look at some of the research of how long it takes for people to, like, take Python, for example, to learn that to a point where they're proficient in it and they understand it and they can write code, because there's a lot of pieces and parts to that, and how to integrate it with the different networking systems. Again, you're talking about a long amount of time, and if there's a need for compliance and automation today, that doesn't deliver very quickly. And so what we would say to that is, Itential specifically has a way to get network engineers and anybody on the network team, give them the ability to build automations without writing any code.
Okay. Well, that seems to make things a little bit easier, but I can't automate because I've just got too much on my plate. Simply put, I don't have the time.
And this one may be the most ironic response and essentially a myth in one way, because it screams, if somebody's saying, I don't have time to do automation, what does that scream? That screams, in order to get out of that hole, I need automation, right? So this is the classic chicken and the egg scenario, and we want to break that cycle. That's a cycle no one has time for. And so if you don't have time, then what you really are looking for is automation to take away that backlog, and then it becomes a matter of how quickly can we get into automation, and especially automation with compliance, because these two things must go together.
All right. Consider these myths debunked. So tell me something, I don't know, tell me something that maybe might be controversial.
Something like, you will never have a compliant network without automation, something like that?
That's pretty controversial. I mean, I've always worked under the impression that you have to go and get your house in order.
Sure.
That you have to get a CMDB installed. You have to do all of these things before you start automating. Why isn't that true?
Well, perhaps it was reasonable in the past, but if you look at where we're at in the typical enterprise network, it is no longer something that can be managed even with with the teams that we have today. So you not only need tools, but you need automation to run these tools. And so if we're talking about having a compliant network, we're not talking about subsections or subsets of your network that need compliance. We're talking about everything. And that includes all of your on-prem network domains, right? Data center, enterprise, campus, wireless, SD-WAN, and remote office networks, as well as anything that now exists in the cloud, right? And that's the big one. And think about the rate of change that exists and how quickly you have new network devices and services getting deployed. And so what you recognize is that in order to really have a comprehensive compliance strategy for the entire network, it's necessary to involve automation. So these two things really, really do go together, and they must go together in order for any enterprise in the world today with a modern network infrastructure that we've seen that continues to grow, must have automation and compliance working together.
Interesting. So it's almost like automation really has to be the foundation of your compliance strategy, and then compliance needs to be the foundation of your automation strategy.
They are two sides of the same coin in that sense, yes.
Excellent. All right. So, we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of an automation and compliance solutions needing to be really kind of the same thing. And, our CTO here kind of describes it as these two ships kind of passing in the night, right? You've got a compliance team and you've got an automation team, and each team is kind of focused on their own thing. So talk to us about why that's not a good model and why your automation solution should also be your compliance solution.
Fantastic. So the thought here is, and I think it's really logical, right? If I have a set of compliance processes and tools, but they fail to have any real sort of comprehensive automation, what that means is, and if we look at traditional, NCCM type tools, they were very limited in a lot of ways. They were limited in the scope of what devices they could manage, right? A subset of CLI devices across one or maybe a few vendors, but certainly not comprehensive across everything. They certainly didn't have any kind of API integration. That was not something that was part of the thought process of these solutions. And automation was not really considered outside of the platform, and even within the platforms and these solutions, automation was very limited. And so if you've got compliance, but you don't have automation, what you're going to end up doing is having this subset of compliance across a subset of network devices. And that really just, if the idea is to have compliance across your entire network, that just means for all of the different network domains that my compliance tools and processes don't address, I have to do that manually. And now you've created more manual backlog on top of the existing manual backlog. And of course, that is a problem. Today's network engineers already have backlog issues, and now creating an additional backlog issue because of the limitations of the compliance without automation side of things really, really just exacerbates the problem.
So what about a situation in which I've got an automation solution, but maybe I don't have a compliance solution, or they're not joined together, or I've got a compliance solution that's on the side that's running on my on-prem devices and that type of thing?
Yeah.
What does this lead to?
Well, this leads to, unfortunately, a lot of really bad configurations. So if automation is something that allows anybody, in the IT organization, or even if just the networking folks, but maybe the cloud folks, to spin up networking services or deploy new networking devices without the strategy of making sure the way that these new networking elements are configured is built upon a compliance standard. And if the automations allow them to deploy these net new network elements without the compliance checking, then what should we expect to find? Lots and lots of network infrastructure that is configured very badly, right? And when we say badly, that can lead to a number of problems, like security issues always being top of mind, but performance and reliability and and failover and things like that. So that is the issue here. And if you want to look no closer than the amount of automation that exists in the cloud, and we're talking about deploying not just applications. We're talking about deploying networking, and we've already seen research where the misconfiguration in the cloud has already led to a lot of issues around security and performance and reliability. And so that to us is exactly the issue, is you have to tightly couple these things together, because if you just have automation without any kind of compliance, we should expect to see misconfigured network infrastructure.
So what about an organization that has a compliance solution, and then they have an automation solution, but they're not really put together? So you've got an automation solution that just focuses on automating, and you've got a compliance solution that just focuses on compliance, but they're not joined together somehow, some way. What's this lead to?
Yeah, so what we've seen is that customers that have existing NCCM solutions that are doing compliance, again, they're fairly limited, or they're very limited in regards to today's modern network and how far-reaching network infrastructure is. So they don't address all of the entire network. So you're stuck with building compliance according to the limitations of these solutions and tools. So that's one. And a lot of times they aren't very good at allowing any kind of external automation to occur. So what ends up happening is writing code at a low level that may be kind of unnatural to the application in order to figure out how to do some sort of automation with these compliance tools that exist. And so it's strictly because these tools were never intended to be used across cloud and API managed devices. Were never really designed and engineered to be open enough to have the ability to automate through an external source or even sophisticated enough to have a lot of automation built within the platform. And these are the limitations as network teams have had these tools that they're facing today. And so having these two things tightly coupled, we'll show in a minute, is of vital importance. And so any strategy that says, hey, we need compliance and automation on our network, our modern network today, really needs to have these two things together. Otherwise, you're going to do very unnatural things in code to just get the foundational pieces working with your older tools that never were intended to do these things. And then ultimately, you're going to run into frustration and failure because of scale, the amount of devices that can be supported, or the types of devices and services that can be supported. And ultimately, there's a better way for all of this.
So the classic scenario here describing that is, you've got a compliance solution that was built specifically for on-prem devices and networks, but most of your network automation and configuration and changes are actually happening maybe in a data center or in the public cloud. And so, as Rich said, I think having those two, having an automation solution that's really rooted and foundationally built in the idea of compliance, I think can help you overcome some of the hurdles that we've talked about. So we've got a question really quick that's about this. So let's dive into that. So the question is, what if we already have a config compliance solution? How do you work with existing tools?
Well, that's a great question. So ultimately, we want to take a look at the specifics of the tool. We've already had customers that, one of our guiding principles is at Itential is the right tool for the right job. So customers already have existing tools, and so one of the key differentiators of our platform is to integrate with their existing tools and systems, ideally through an API. Which many of them have. And so we'll leverage that API and either automatically build an integration, or there could be a pre-built already for that particular tool. And then we can leverage what is exposed in that API as part of an automation that a customer can build inside of Automation Studio. So the intent is to use what they've got, but ultimately knowing that, if there's deficiencies in the tools that they have, that ultimately the modern new way to do it is to support everything that you have in your network, whether it's cloud or on-prem, and move in a direction that makes automation very, very easy and natural to move to.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just to take that a step further, if an organization is heavily invested in a specific NCCM tool, maybe they've got 3, 4, 5 years worth of work put into it. It stores all of their configurations for their on-prem tools or networking. There's really no need necessarily to rip out and replace that. The integration that Rich is talking about really sort of obviates the need for you to have to just pull that out and completely start over. So for those organizations that aren't comfortable just starting over, this integration point really makes things pretty easy.
Yeah, and by integrating it into our platform, whatever deficiencies were in those tools, now you have the capability to address the rest of your network and build automation alongside what's available through those existing tools, through those integrations as well.
Indeed, great question. All right, so what are the foundational components of a network automation solution like we're talking about? Well, it needs to have the ability to integrate with network systems. And when we say network systems, we're talking on-prem, traditional physical devices, Cisco, Juniper, Arista, things like VMware NSX, things like public cloud networking services, VPCs, VNets, SD-WAN controllers, so on and so forth. But it needs to be able to integrate across the board with all of your networking systems. Then, as we've discussed, it needs to have the ability to manage configurations and compliance across that broad swath of networking systems and services that we talked about before. Then it needs the ability to automate network processes, right? And then IT orchestration. And when we're talking about IT orchestration, we're really talking about high-level orchestration that is automating processes across different kinds of tools like ITSM tools, NCCM tools, things like Slack notification tools, emails, log and event management tools, and so on and so forth. So let's look at these one at a time and just kind of talk through some of these. So Rich, when we're talking about this first layer here, just kind of walk us through this.
All right, so the basic layer here, the foundational layer is how do we integrate and address all of the network devices, whether they're physical, virtual, cloud native services? How do we address all of that and have some way to integrate with all of them? Some of them might be direct through CLI. Some of them might be accessible through controllers like SD-WAN or wireless. Some of them might be, cloud native to certain cloud platforms that are network services. And so any solution needs to be able to integrate with the entire network. And, that's, again, like we said earlier, that's been one of the deficiencies of the past, is limited integration with all of the network things that you have.
So the second layer here is all about configuration management and compliance. So let's talk about these a little bit, Rich, and how these two pieces are really sort of the foundational components of any good solid network automation solution.
Sure. So once we have an inventory of our network devices coming from our different sources, through integration with different sources, then we have the opportunity to manage those configurations. At the very simplest point is, can I back up a configuration? Can I do a configuration diff? If I can do that, then I can start to build what we call golden configuration templates. And this becomes the compliance standard, so that I can now take this golden configuration for a set of devices, and a set could be hundreds of devices, and in a very specific way, run compliance reporting. So I want to be able to check. So I built a compliance template, a golden configuration template. I want to be able to check this set of devices against this template, because this is the way they ought to be operating. And now those devices ought to be anywhere on the network, right? Anywhere on the network. We're not talking on-prem. We could be talking about cloud-based services that are managed and configured through APIs, not CLI. And so we want to be able to address these functions very broadly and implement things like the ability to do remediation. So when we do a compliance check and we get a report, automation needs to be part of the remediation process. Again, think about the rate of change. Consider how much new infrastructure is being deployed. If we can't at least have the opportunity and flexibility to remediate the compliance issues that we find, or at least build the logic to remediate a great deal of those things, then we still just create backlog for network teams to have to go in and manually build. So we want to be able to do that. And as we've talked about in a previous webinar in this series, is the ability to do validation changes. So to implement automations that can check a proposed configuration before any infrastructure is deployed.
All right. Next layer up is network process automation. So Rich, talk to us a little bit about this. What do we mean by network process automation?
Well, so automation, we're building a foundation here. We want to be able to, aggregate and federate all of our devices. We want to be able to build configurations, golden configurations, backup configurations. And we've already talked about the need for integrating automation, making sure it's tightly coupled with this entire process. And so the next level up is, how do we make sure that everything below in these two levels, these kind of pink levels here, can be accessed through automation directly and quickly and easily, and ideally no code, because that's one of the problems that networking teams face, is like, I don't have the time, and I maybe don't even want to have the desire to write code. And so now what you need on this layer is the ability to take everything under it: network devices, compliance reporting and remediation, validation, and build them into network-centric automations, not in just particular network domains like the data center, but across different network domains if necessary. So if an application is deployed in the cloud, well, that necessitates some sort of cloud network infrastructure, and many applications now may be deployed in multiple clouds, right? They have assets that are in different cloud platforms. Again, different network infrastructure and different cloud platforms. And if it's going back to an on-prem data center, now you have 3 different network domains or network types. Our automation technology ought to be able to address all of those and drive compliance and validation across all of that, and do it in a way where networking teams have the freedom, the flexibility, and are empowered to build these automation workflows themselves.
Great. And then lastly, we're talking about IT orchestration, right? This sort of high-level automation across a lot of different types of systems. So talk to us a little bit about orchestration here, Rich.
So the top of the food chain here is taking everything we've done under it and then making it available and applicable outside of the networking domain. So one of the things that always pops up is if we can build these really solid network automations that are across the domain, right? They could be something like, the idea is let's deploy a new application. Well, where's the network in that application? If it's across multiple domains, well, that's that blue layer, right? Networking teams will build solid network automations across those different domains, leveraging everything under them, including validation. And now these things are solid. They're ironclad. They have like requisite pre-checks, post-checks, the ability to to do failover and rollback, and these are solid. So now, how do we allow them to be used in a self-service way, either directly or through maybe even a greater automation? And that self-service method, is it inside of our platform, or can it be used in something like ServiceNow? And that's kind of the top layer there. And then being able to take those as well and integrate them with other IT systems and services that are part of the IT ecosystem, but not necessarily part of the network domain. So anytime something gets done on the network, ideally, there should be some sort of documentation around it, right? So your change request system.
Yeah.
Exactly. So every step of that needs to be documented. And today, network engineers, as they're doing the network work, they're also having to go back and do like updates to tickets and closing tickets out and opening up new tickets and things like that.
This is the time-consuming stuff.
This becomes the other half of, maybe even the greater half in that sense of the time consumption that network teams, I need more time. And so being able to also integrate with those systems that are not directly network centric, but still part of the IT ecosystem is important. And so there's a layer there, as well as taking all of this and being able to do some very, very responsive methods of closed loop automation and even event-driven closed loop remediation. Again, taking everything that was built on the automation with the devices and compliance and tying it into a message system where we can immediately have an automation respond to a change in the network, if that kind of alerting is available. And then ultimately we want to tie all this up with an appropriate amount of analytics and reporting to make sure that we understand every change that's been made, who made the change, where it was, and how much time these automations are taking, because we want to also make efficient automations.
Right, and so for those of you who did not see our last webinar and are interested in seeing Itential's automation platform solution doing some of this high-level modern IT orchestration, I recommend that you check that out. It's available to you on our website. And in that, Rich demonstrates these foundational building blocks, which we're going to get into a lot deeper into today when we do our demonstration. But he also shows how they serve as the foundational building blocks for things like self-service networking, closed-loop automations, and such. So, highly encourage you to check that out if you weren't able to join us last time. All right, so let's talk about how all of these things align to specific components in the Itential automation platform. So Rich, just kind of walk us through these, starting from the ground up here.
So yeah, the first layer was how do we get all our network devices and services identified and integrated with everything else above, in the above layers. And with Itential's platform, the whole thought process was about integration of all of your networking devices and services, whether it's CLI-based, on-prem with APIs through controllers, or in the cloud. It's really future-proofed. We take an API approach to integration, so we can easily consume the APIs that are available in many of these systems, whether they're cloud native, controller-based, and immediately bring all of the network elements that are managed by those devices into our system. So that's the foundation. And, for customers that have a lot of CLI devices without some sort of controller, which many of them do, like we have a product, an application called part of our platform called Automation Gateway that can help them get started there. And by doing that, again, we federate everything, and then we can kind of get to that next layer, which is how do we, now that we have all our devices identified, accessible, integrated, and manageable, and we have access to their configurations, how do we drive compliance across all of that? And within our platform is Configuration Manager. Configuration Manager is the key to doing that across both API and CLI, on-prem and cloud. And so taking all of this, so we're addressing those limitations of previous tools and saying all of this can be done so that you can drive compliance across your whole network by a single application. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we actually have a question about Configuration Manager here, so if we could just pause for a second and cover this. And the question is, what network vendors are supported by the Configuration Manager application?
So again, network vendors, we support all the major network vendors. I think you already mentioned Cisco, Arista, Juniper, different flavors within them. If you go to our website, you'll see a list of all of them. And in addition to that, it's not just traditional network vendors, but network security, like firewalls, things like that, are also supported from a CLI perspective. Because CLIs, new vendors can come out, or existing vendors can come out with new CLIs, even within a new portfolio or a different portfolio of products. We have the ability for our customers to build their own CLI parsing, config parsing, so that they don't have to wait, necessarily for us to have support for something, which has been a problem with a lot of traditional solutions. Is if you have a subset of devices that is supported by this particular config management solution, well, then you're all good. But what about buying the best product for that particular solution that's not supported there? Well, then it's always a lengthy process, if it even ever happens, of asking the vendor to support that. And part of our philosophy is our customers know what the right tool for the job is. That includes networking solutions. So give them the broadest portfolio of things that are supported, and for everything else, give them the ability to build, give them the framework to build the configuration parsers needed to do golden configuration. So there's nothing that they have to actually wait for from us.
Makes sense. All right. So let's move on to the next layer here, automated network processes. How does that align to the Automation Studio application inside of IEP? Okay,
so you remember Gary says, I don't have time and I don't want to write code.
He's also very lazy.
And he's also... Well, the Automation Studio is where network engineers like Gary and other more, less lazy engineers can go in and build their own network automations, leverage pre-built automations from a library of top use cases, and do it without writing code. Drag and drop Canvas. We'll take a look at it today. And again, we're talking also about being able to do automation across multiple domains and leveraging a lot of, since we're a network automation platform, there's a lot of built-in network intelligence and the ability for those same engineers to quickly create even more network intelligence. And we'll talk a little more about that because, there's a logic process. Before I make a change, certain things ought to be in place, right? So making sure that they have the ability to integrate the process that they would normally have in their minds or as part of a MOP to build that into a workflow so that they can continue to create more and more intelligent automations.
Gotcha. So now let's talk a little bit about modern IT orchestration. We've touched on it in the past. We've talked about Gary, the unusually lazy network engineer. But now let's introduce Greg, who is a DevOps guy who is really always interested in spinning things up as quickly as possible. So how does that align to Operations Manager and modern IT orchestration in general?
Yeah, so from Greg's perspective, he is all about automation. And so remember what we said earlier, automation without compliance leads to bad configurations. And so this is where you get the synergy of both. If I can allow my networking teams to onboard all of their network devices and services, build compliance across everything very, very quickly, write automations, build automations very quickly as well, and then expose those automations through an API or an external self-service catalog through an API, That gives Greg the ability to do what he wants to do, which is, I just want to build automation. He's not a networking expert. And so the networking expertise is now being handled by the networking team, the right team for that. But now they have the ability to build their own automations, put their own network intelligence in, have the right pre-checks and post-checks, and then publish that automation out to guys like Greg and his team, so that everybody can kind of get, it's like a seat at the table. Finally, they get to actually take part in the automation process and strategy of the entire IT organization, and build in all of the security and confidence in their automations that they just didn't have before, because they maybe had to write code, and then that's the domain of Greg and the DevOps guys, but they don't have the networking knowledge to ensure that these configurations are compliant and they're safe.
So bring Greg to the adults Thanksgiving table is what you're saying. I like it. Okay. All right. Let's jump into a demo here. So Rich, if you would just really quickly walk us through what we're going to see today, and then let's take a look at it.
Sure. So what we're going to see today is, let's take a traditional networking device, CLI driven, Cisco being the most common, right? And let's step you through how we can quickly take so we're starting from that lowest level, right? Where we need to onboard all of our devices, whether they're CLI, API, on-prem, cloud, wherever they may be. It's all part of our network infrastructure. We need to onboard them and make them available. So we start there. So we're going to be able to do CLI with a Cisco device and API with an AWS VPC. So we're covering, both ends of this spectrum here with that. So that's that first level. And the second level is, how do we build compliance quickly without spending an inordinate you can say the word, amount of time. Because one of the things, remember, if we go back to some of the original slides we talked about, is I don't have time, and I don't have time to get my network completely in order, whether that's directly through manual processes, through existing tools, or through some sort of single source of truth. It takes too much time to do that, and that's my struggle in order to get me to automation. And what we want to show you is that you can start very quickly doing a subset of your compliance and shift into automation for the compliance piece. So you're doing compliance, and you're also learning how to do automation as a skill set. It's kind of like a compounding interest situation. It's a beautiful thing. So you can do both simultaneously, and as you grow your compliance standard, you're also going to be able to leverage automation to get you out of that backlog, so that you have more time, so that you can build more automations, and at the same time get your network kind of in that tip-top shape that you really want it to be, which also accelerates your ability to automate, because you have more trust and confidence in what's going on.
Excellent. Well, let's see it in action.
Okay. So let me share my screen here. All right. Can you see it?
I can.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so we're starting in the Itential automation platform, which includes all of those layers, right, as part of everything we do in the platform. But the first step we're going to take is the configuration manager. So, Glenn, remember the whole concept of that first layer was what? How do I get all my devices federated and integrated? So that's what we're looking at now. We're looking at everything from Cisco devices that are CLI-based, Juniper devices, firewalls, Arista devices, as well as AWS VPCs. So that's that first layer. How do we get everything in the network? We want to make sure that we can address everything that our network infrastructure is made up of. So that's the first thing. So since we're going to start off with a Cisco device, we'll start here. So the concept is very simple. I should be able to access my device and load its configuration up. And this is actually using Automation Gateway, so that was one of the layers specific to Itential that helps customers bring on board and federate that inventory of network devices that are CLI-driven. So here we go. We have the latest configuration, and we can create backups, right? We can do comparisons and diffs. We've been through that before. But the concept here is, how do we quickly get started building a compliance standard for this, and then how do we shift very quickly into automation and accomplish both things simultaneously? So what I want to do here is just do a simple copy and paste of this configuration. And then take us over to, you know what, I'll actually just paste it in the notepad here. And I'll take you over to the next section of Configuration Manager that we'll look at, which is the golden configuration. So we've taken a configuration of a network device. This could be like, this is the network device that is the ideal device. Maybe this is the thing that I feel most confident is compliant, right? And so let's start very simply, because we always have to start simply. And so what we can do is we can build a golden configuration tree. So I have 3 sections here that I've pre-built. And now we can start to take a look at our configuration and fit them into this tree. And what I mean by that is let's just kind of pare this down from kind of the essentials of where we're starting. And what I want to think about is, you know, in any kind of configuration that I'm looking at for a network device, there's a subset of configurations that are going to be like globally relevant across a lot of devices, or maybe all of those devices of that type. And then there are going to be configurations that are kind of more like maybe regionally relevant. And then there's going to be some configurations that are just very specific to maybe even a specific device. And so I just want to break that up here, and I want to use routing features that, you know, aren't necessarily the most critical, but they are important, because we always want to start off building trust and confidence. So you kind of start with low-hanging fruit here. So let me separate these out, and then we'll start to apply them into this configuration tree, and we'll see how this tree and this inheritance feature works. So if I look at these configurations here, I can say, you know, from a very this is a very specific configuration where I have a very specific name of a device here. And I can kind of group this out. So this very top piece is like very general, like globally relevant. I want to apply this. This middle section here from the configuration is like relevant to the U.S. I want to make sure my syslog device host is in the U.S. as well as having a common SNMP server community or SNMP community for telemetry and getting data from this router. And then I want to make sure my time server is also pointed to a U.S. server. So that's very specific to the U.S. And then I have very specific configurations for the Atlanta router here in Atlanta. So, and I can even add something here too that I didn't grab from the config. I can do that right now. And so what I'll do is I'll just take this, and if we go to this base configuration, this is the global configuration that's going to apply to all devices that are routers that I apply to this that I can assign to these trees, and I'll show you what that means in a minute. So I can paste this, and this will become a baseline configuration for every branch under this base all routers branch here, or the baseline. There is an issue here. I don't like this particular line. Because it would not be compliant to best practices and security standards. IP HTTP server turns on a management interface on a router, but it's unencrypted. So one of the things we can do here is we can disallow this line. Oops. And so now we can have a negative test. We can make sure that this particular line shouldn't occur in a configuration for a router that's assigned to these trees. But at the same time, I want to allow IP HTTP server because that is a secure version, right? That's encrypted. So I can also select a different severity. So I'm going to just identify these as if there's any compliance violation, it will generate an error. And from that, I've started down the very first step in my compliance, my golden configuration compliance. So I go down to the next step. So these are configurations that should be relevant to all US routers. So if I look at the config, I'm inheriting from the all routers config, which is excellent because a lot of times if you have too many configurations, if they come to be unique to every single device, then you really don't have golden configurations. So this allows us to make a single change in an upper layer that gets inherited down to the other layers. So if your configuration compliance changes over time, perhaps I want to remove that particular line and not allow secure services. I can make that change in one branch of the tree, in the base branch, and it will filter down to everything else through inheritance. So in this next section, we're just going to grab these configurations and literally just paste them in here. And by the way, we actually have a feature here where I can import a live configuration, and I can do this within the editor. But there's a lot of cutting and pasting, I thought it would be clearer to do it this way. So I can go here and set these to error as well, save it. Now I've just accomplished the second level in my compliance standard, and now I get to the very, very specific parts. And this is specific to a particular router in this case, and I can have as many layers as I really need or want, depending on your environment and how many devices you have. Obviously, this is just for example here, but now I'm gonna create that, and now I have taken the very first step in a couple of minutes in creating from a live configuration a very basic but very important golden configuration standard. And if I wanted to now add another device to here, it's very simple. I could take, for instance, I could take this, and I could say, all right, so under here, I can add a child. So I have Atlanta here under US routers, so I could easily go and say, let's define one for Chicago. And under its configuration, I have everything that's inherited from the blue and the green, and now I have the opportunity to paste in something very specific to this router, right? And maybe it should be Chicago 0 instead of ATL 3. And that quickly, I can now start to iterate and start building configurations that are very unique for devices, and then go back to these different layers and start building out more configurations. And so this is one of the things we want to show, is that it's very quick and easy to start doing this, and you don't have to get everything in line before you can automate. You can start with the very basic things and then start to grow it from there, which is completely a unique way of doing things. Now, just because I have a configurations template here, I need to assign a device to it so that it can be checked against that, and that's what I can do here. I can pull up my live configuration or my live inventory and say, let's add ATL3. And now this device will have its configuration checked against this golden config. And we can, from right here, run a compliance report, and this will take a moment. But while it's running, I'll also mention that from any one of these trees, we can actually, branches, we can add devices to. So while I have a very specific unique device in the Atlanta branch, the lowest level branch, I actually could also have added something to the US routers branch, and its configuration, golden configuration, would have everything from the blue and the green, but not in the orange, which I can now apply devices to that specific branch as well. So at any level of the branch, you can actually add devices and run compliance against those. So it's really flexible here. So we've seen that the compliance report came back as a failure. Why? Because I turned that IP HTTP server to a disallow. From within the application, I can point and click that particular line, apply it, and now it's going to go and remediate it from the application. So again, this is how you get started very, very quickly within the application to build a golden configuration, run a compliance check, and then even do a remediation here. Now it's manual in the sense that I'm pointing and clicking, but it's actually doing all of the steps of doing the remediation on the background through Automation Gateway and CLI. So there is some automation going on here, but it's not the kind of automation that we need to like shift to that we've been talking about. But within this tool itself helps get network teams started with compliance and allows them to now shift over into automation through Automation Studio, and that's what we'll take a look at next. So the response came back that said, hey, this was complete, so now if we run a compliance report, this should come back as completely clean, meaning we are now completely under compliance because we removed that IP HTTP server line from the CLI, and now we're in a state of compliance. While that's running here, let me shift over to how we can quickly go into the world of automation from compliance. This is the automation platform as a whole. If I go to Automation Studio, if you recall, this is where we can build automations, or we can leverage pre-built automations from our library that are freely available. And if I open up this compliance automation. It's a very simple and straightforward automation that's literally doing everything we've just done in the configuration manager. And so this is the first step to understanding why it's so important to have these things tied together. So the very first step here is I'm running a compliance report for this particular tree. So this has come back as passed, but this is the configuration tree we just created. The first step is to run the same compliance report in that automation. So we can leverage every step of the application in our automation because of that coupling together. So the next step in the automation is to get the report detail. We're generating a report. What does the report say? Querying is just pulling data out so that we can do an evaluation and determine, hey, is this something, did we have any errors? If so, let's go down a remediation path, and we can actually do some automatic remediation the same way. Or you can build out your logic to say, perhaps I should only remediate certain types of changes, and other types of changes, maybe we need to do a change management or update, or we should do it during a certain maintenance window. That's the kind of logic now that the network teams can go and start to build in a very quick and easy way. But it starts here. So if I run this, actually, let me do one thing, because this is always what happens. Gary goes back into the router directly, and he says, you know what, I really want to turn on that service again. And he pops out, and now we're out of compliance. And so in the same way we ran a compliance from the config manager application, we can now use an automation to do the same thing. But unlike the configuration management application, with an automation, we can do every single step, but the network team has the ability to now build this out and include their own intelligence and logic that they would normally use as part of their process. So now they can really start to build this out. And so the remediation, so this is a manual task that says, hey, there was an error in that compliance check, and it should be no surprise that it was a disallowed line that is IP HTTP server, that Gary did it. So if I hit connect, continue now, it will actually do a remediation in the same automation. And so that next step is to do an automatic remediation. And so there's a one-for-one analogy between, because these are the exact steps that the configuration manager uses in the app, and we're leveraging every single step inside of an automation. And that's what we're talking about, why these things should be tightly coupled. And now, as part of this remediation required, network teams can now start to build out a logic path that allows them to take the processes that they're already used to doing and build that out into an automation. And now this is that compound interest. I can not only build my compliance, but I can also build automation and learn these skills simultaneously. And I can get started immediately.
So we've got a question about this, Rich. Just wanted to jump into that really quickly if we've got a second. So the question is, once a compliance automation is created, how can it be run by others inside or outside the network group?
Okay, so so what I just did was I ran it inside of Automation Studio, which is really more for testing and for demoing. But when this automation, let's say, is completely built out, it can be published inside of the platform so that other people can log in with only specific access. So there's authorization and RBAC rules in place, and we can publish those automations so that somebody else inside the network team or outside the network team could run those from within here. Or ideally, also is expose those automations through an API so that they could be run through something like ServiceNow, or even in another some sort of other self-service portal that an IT enterprise might have.
Excellent.
Okay, so we did that for CLI devices. So the concept obviously is, how do we do it for API and cloud devices or services as well? And so what I'll do here is I'll shift over to AWS's console, its dashboard here, and I'll show that we have a VPC created here. And the last four characters here are 764D. That's just what it's identified as in AWS. So if I go into my devices here back in Configuration Manager, I should be able to find that particular VPC. Let's see, 764D. That's right, isn't it? Yep, 764D. Okay. And just like with CLI, I can load its configuration up. So what I'm doing is I'm asking, so Itential's platform is asking AWS for this particular VPC ID, describe it for me. And it's not CLI. This is actually formatted as a JSON, JSON object. So it has keys and values, but it's still a readable concept. And it still describes how this VPC is configured, just like a CLI describes how a router or a switch is configured. So I can literally take this entire configuration, and just like we did with CLI, and go back to my notepad, paste it in. And now if I go back to golden configurations, we can build a VPC golden config using specifically two features, Internet Gateway and security groups. So if I open up this notepad again, I should be able to find where is the Internet Gateway. The Internet Gateway is like the default router for this VPC, and it starts here, describe Internet Gateways. So I'm going to copy that and literally do the same thing, even though it looks a little different, and paste it into the golden configuration and save it. And then for the second branch here, I'm going to do the same thing for security groups. So this is always a problem, is people changing security groups. This is like the firewall rules for a VPC. So if I start here with describe security groups, I can copy the entire section here that defines it, go to the configuration, and do the exact same thing. Save that. And what I've just done is I've built a configuration standard for this VPC, for VPCs generally, for the Internet Gateway and security group. Now I need, just like I assigned a device to the tree, to that branch of the tree, instead of a device, we're actually going to assign an API task. We call APIs calls tasks here. And we want to be very specific about the task because we need it to describe the VPC in this AWS instance. And so what we want to do is, spell right. All right. And we are calling this API call describe VPC details. And it's going to ask me for two parameters. One is just a name. This is a generic name. So demo VPC Internet Gateway. And then it's going to ask for the VPC ID, which I need from here. So this is the specific VPC that I want to, like a device, I want to run compliance on. I paste it in there, submit, and it's going to make the call to AWS through an API and return its configuration, and that's exactly what I want here. And for security group, I can do the exact same thing. I can go to the security group, manage, add this task, select the right API call, add it, the VPC ID in, and call this demo VPC for security groups. Now I have applied, yep, looks good. Now I have applied the VPC call to these two branches, and now I can run compliance across them the same way I did with the CLI devices. So if I run compliance, it will come back really quickly and say everything is compliant. That's fantastic because we literally pulled it from the working configuration. But if I go into the Internet Gateway here, and I actually take a look at this, this is the VPC that we have defined. This is the Internet Gateway that's applied to it or assigned to it. I can actually decouple those. I can detach them. And once I've detached them, that changes the configuration for that VPC. It no longer has an Internet Gateway assigned. And so now if I run my compliance report, what do we expect? Something's not right. So if we view compliance just like we did earlier, we'll be able to see what was changed, and what was changed was the Internet Gateway. That's exactly what we just changed. So this is being able to do the same processes of golden configuration across both CLI and API. And if I wanted to attach this back, obviously I can. And then the last piece of this is how do we move now from this to automation, right? It's the same concept. So if I go to the security group, if I ran this now, it would come back completely clean. So let's make a change to the security group. So under that security group, we have this VPC assigned to this security group. That security group is defined. Remember, this is like a firewall. So if I edit the rules, right now it's allowing all traffic, but if I limit it to SSH, save the rules, this has materially changed the configuration of that VPC and that VPC security group. So now this is no longer compliant. So instead of running it here, let's go to an automation very similar to the last one we saw where we did this with a CLI device. And again, if we run this, it's doing step by step exactly what we were doing before in the CLI configuration automation. I think I might be hitting a slowdown here. Okay, let's try that again. Let's run this automation. Now we can view the job. You might have several here, but that's okay. Let's take a look at the visual. Okay, so the first step, run compliance check, just like we did earlier manually in the Configuration Manager app. It waited for the check. It got the compliance report. That compliance report, we pulled the data out. We evaluate it. We see that there was a change that is now asking us to take a look at this task. This manual task allows us to stop the automation so that we can do some human intervention. And it's going to describe for us the problem. And the problem is our security groups is changed. So that's because we changed that materially. And so if I continue that on, the automation will finish. And of course, if we make the manual remediation of the security group here back to the way it's supposed to be, then the next time we run that same automation, it will come back as completed without any checks. And so the whole idea here is, again, you start with compliance, you quickly build from a configuration, your golden configuration. You can run the process of compliance checking and remediation within the application, but then there's a one-to-one correlation to getting started in Automation Studio, which allows you now to very clearly understand, yeah, our task is completed. There were no errors with that because it's now I've just remediated it manually. But the idea then is to be able to now have a one-to-one correlation that allows you to continue to work on your compliance golden configuration and compliance templates, as well as leverage automation so that you can reduce that workload. And then finally, as you're gaining the skills of learning automation here, you're also at the same time making your network more compliant, which gives you more trust and confidence, not only in the network's ability to support more automation and more complex automation, but you're actually building your skills up and your network team skills up at the same time by using automations to do all this. And now they can go and use other API tasks, build out logic so that this remediation task can now have greater logic and network intelligence that comes directly from the network team, which ultimately allows them to really start creating their own specific automations that ideally in the future become something that can be self-service published.
Well, that is excellent. Thank you for that demonstration. We are 3 minutes over on time, so we've already answered a couple of questions. We have a couple more that we will answer via email. So let me just flip us back over here to the slides really quickly. Encourage anybody and everybody who is interested in trying the product to go and sign up and try it. You can try it for free using mock device data, or if you're ready to move it on into your own environment, you can do that as well. So access our cloud native SaaS application and try it yourself. You can do that at itential.com/get-started. And then I would encourage you all to join us for the next webinar, which will be on November 30th, Tuesday, November 30th, where we'll introduce Itential's Configuration Manager. We've already talked about it a little bit, and you've seen a little bit in action, but Rich is going to go through it in a lot more detail. And this will be a lot more demonstration and a lot less slideware. So definitely encourage you to do that if you're interested in understanding the nuts and bolts of Configuration Manager. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and hope to see you Tuesday, November 30th.